There's a new slave labor, or at least unpaid labor. Let's not minimize the horrors of historic slavery. That should concern all of us. Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. On the line with us is Laura Starecheski, senior radio editor at Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. She's also won a National Edward R. Murrow Award, a DuPont Columbia, and a Peabody, among other awards. She previously reported on health for the NPR Science Desk. And boy, what a remarkable CV. Laura, welcome to the program. Starecheski, Starecheski is your Twitter handle, I should add. You have this story, or you're talking about this story of rehab and unpaid work. What's the connection here?
Sure. Hi. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm part of a team over at Reveal that's been looking into rehab facilities for actually about 3 years. And what we found are facilities across the United States, in almost every single state, where people who need addiction treatment walk through the door expecting something like counseling or some of the other addiction treatments that we all think of. And instead, they are sent to work sometimes for companies that the rehab owns and sometimes for outside corporations for 40 hours a week, sometimes as many as 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and they are not getting paid for their labor.
Whoa. Now, with regard to our prisons, the 13th Amendment didn't end slavery. It merely limited it to people who've been convicted of a crime. And so, the United States has 430 people per 100,000 incarcerated compared to, like 17 per 100,000 in Norway, or 44 per 100,000 in France, or 71 per 100,000 in the United Kingdom. I think most Americans are familiar with those statistics, or at least realize that the reason why we have more prisoners than any other country in the world is because prisons legally can actually run as slave labor institutions. And in some cases, with a brutality that probably doesn't rival old-fashioned slavery, but or historic slavery, but is pretty awful. But this is not being done under color of law, is it?
Well, there actually is a connection. A lot of the people that we interviewed, and we spoke with hundreds of people to report out this story who've experienced this. And about a third of the facilities on our list, we found a minimum number of 300 rehab facilities across the U.S. that are work-based and do not pay people for their work or pay them pennies on the dollar. And about a third of the programs that we found accept people who are court-ordered. So that means that they may have a felony charge hanging over them. They may have years or maybe decades in prison hanging over them if they do not complete this program. So there is a connection to the criminal legal system. Not everyone is entangled in it, but a lot of the participants that we spoke with were, and that compelled them to try to stay and stick it out through programs that can be as long as 2 years.
Now, a lot of people, when you say rehab, they think of some Hollywood celebrity going off to a fancy place in the in the desert outside Los Angeles with a beautiful view and, 5-star accommodations and, massages in the afternoon. And then they sit around and talk about their childhood with group therapy in the afternoon or in the mornings or whatever. This is not what you're talking about here. This is not, people are not paying to go to these facilities, or are they? Am I missing something?
Well, these facilities sometimes will mention on their websites that they are low-cost or no-cost rehab. So typically, the work that the participants do, I can mention some of the corporations that people in this situation have done work at. They are big corporations that I'm sure your listeners have heard of. Exxon, Shell, Walmart, U.S. Foods, Williams-Sonoma. We have heard of people picking cotton and pecans on a farm in Georgia, maintaining oil rigging in Louisiana, building luxury apartments in the San Francisco Bay Area. So they're doing all kinds of work in many states.
Without pay in exchange for keeping them away from presumably what, heroin, alcohol, things like that?
All kinds of substances. They do not discriminate in terms of the kind of substance use disorder that someone may have. But typically how it works is, like I mentioned, someone could be court ordered there. So in that case, they may not pay, or they may end up paying a small fee, $500, $1,000. We have also heard of people paying thousands of dollars to take part in these programs. They are not given accurate information much of the time about what the program entails. We talked to a man named Tim Rowe from Ohio who thought he was going to one of the top-of-the-line rehabs you described. This was at an organization, a nonprofit called the Center Foundation. They, at the time, had programs in Louisiana and Texas, and Tim needed treatment. He had an issue with using meth and heroin. His family was incredibly worried for him, and they helped him get to the Center Foundation in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Before he arrived, he looked at a commercial for the rehab and saw participants swimming in a sparkling blue pool and strolling on a lawn with a counselor. But when Tim arrived, he found out that what the program entailed was full-time or more than full-time work, physical labor, doing jobs like making steel cables for shipping companies or doing electrical work, which he was not adequately trained for. So we have also heard of people doing quite dangerous jobs, and we've documented a number of severe injuries, broken backs, mangled hands, and even several deaths at facilities like this.
Can people leave these facilities?
If you're court ordered, leaving could mean that you will face years or decades in prison. And we've also found that it's not uncommon at facilities like this for some of what they would call therapeutic tactics to be quite abusive and shaming. And I was surprised doing the reporting at just how many participants spoke in language like, I felt brainwashed. I was afraid.
Well, this is a big thing back in the 80s and 90s. Forgive my jumping in. We got about a minute and a half here until we hit a hard break. But back in the 80s and 90s, there was this whole scared straight thing where they were taking high school kids and running them through things that were like boot camps. And very often there was a work component to it as a therapeutic thing. And, at first they were getting all kinds of great publicity. Then it turned out there was a very abusive side to it. Is this an outgrowth of that or a parallel to that in some way?
Yeah, actually, in our podcast series, American Rehab on Reveal, we go back to the beginning and we trace the history of where programs like this came from. And a large number of them originated at actually a program that turned into a cult. It's called Synanon, if you've heard of it. It was founded in the late 50s and was one of the very few places at that time that people who used heroin could get any kind of addiction treatment, and unfortunately relied on these punitive shaming tactics and unpaid work. And we found that, since the 1980s and the rise of mass incarceration, that programs like this have just proliferated. And now with the opioid epidemic, we've got so many vulnerable people